Genevieve woke up before sunrise, as she did every day. The modest apartment was still enveloped in the silence of the early morning, broken only by the soft sound of the wind blowing against the window. With careful movements, she rose from the bed and walked to the small room next to hers. The dim hallway light illuminated the delicate face of Delilah, her 8-year-old daughter, who slept curled up under the covers, her breathing frail and labored. Genevieve bent down, tucked the golden strands of hair behind the girl's ear, and felt her heart tighten as she saw the tiny fingers still gripping a colored pencil. Another unfinished drawing lay next to the pillow. "You don't let go of those pencils even when you're sleeping, my love," she whispered, smiling tenderly. Genevieve's routine was a race against time. She worked as a receptionist at a small hospital, an opportunity she had seized after years of effort, and did everything to maintain an impeccable reputation. Her job was her only guarantee of continuing Delilah's treatments, as the girl had faced minor health issues since infancy. But at the age of 5 came the diagnosis that would change everything: leukemia. Genevieve felt the ground disappear from under her feet when she heard those words leave the doctor's mouth. Leukemia. The disease was spreading through her daughter's blood like an invisible, silent enemy, ready to consume her little life. The world seemed to spin as the doctor explained the treatment: aggressive chemotherapy, constant blood transfusions, expensive medications, and endless tests. From that moment on, Delilah's life depended on numbers and test results. White blood cells, platelets, hemoglobin levels. Every detail could mean the difference between a stable day and an emergency hospitalization. Chemotherapy devastated the girl's body. Delilah grew weaker and weaker. Her once rosy skin turned pale. Her hair fell out little by little and her appetite disappeared. Some nights her fever spiked so high that Genevieve would spend hours holding her daughter in her arms, begging for it all to be just a nightmare. But it wasn't. It was real, and there was no option but to keep fighting. Genevieve couldn't falter. She needed to work, pay for the medicines, schedule the tests, and at the same time be by her daughter's side for every treatment session. It was a cruel game of survival, where every penny counted and every mistake could be costly. She no longer slept. She no longer lived. She merely existed to ensure that Delilah had a chance to keep fighting. In the kitchen, the aroma of fresh coffee filled the air as Genevieve prepared Delilah's lunchbox. Fruits, natural juice, and a carefully wrapped sandwich. The clock struck 6:30 when Mrs. Carmen appeared at the door, as she did every morning. The elderly neighbor was a constant presence in their lives, a sort of adopted grandmother who helped however she could. "Good morning, Genevieve. How's my girl today?" asked Mrs. Carmen, gently placing her hand on the young mother's shoulder. "She had a little fever last night, but she's better now. I'll take her to school before going to work," Genevieve replied as she finished organizing her daughter's backpack. Mrs. Carmen sighed, concerned. "You stretch yourself too thin, my child. Don't forget to take care of yourself, too." Genevieve smiled tiredly but sincerely. "I do take care of myself, Mrs. Carmen. I just need to make sure Delilah has everything she needs." Delilah appeared in the kitchen doorway, rubbing her sleepy eyes. Her skin was pale, her lips slightly dry, but her smile was always bright. With an effort, she climbed onto a chair and grabbed one of the drawings she had left on the table the night before. "Look, Mum, I made this yesterday." She held out the paper, revealing a colorful drawing. It was a simple scene, yet loaded with emotion. Genevieve held her hand while a rainbow shone in the sky. Genevieve held the paper for a few seconds, feeling a pang in her chest. "It's beautiful, my love. You have an incredible talent." Rushing not to be late, Genevieve made sure Delilah had taken her medications before they left. The journey to school was short, and Delilah always enjoyed telling the made-up stories she had imagined. It was one of the few parts of the day when Genevieve could simply savor the moment, absorbing every word from her daughter. After dropping her off, Genevieve headed to work. In the workplace, she was known for her impeccable dedication. She wasn't just an exemplary employee, but someone who genuinely cared about the impact of what they produced there. Working in a hospital was, for her, a way to give back to the world the good that the medicines provided for her daughter. In the middle of the morning, Supervisor Silas strode across the department with his stern gaze and arrogant posture. He was a man of rigid authority, but with a questionable track record. Genevieve always kept her distance, avoiding any friction. "Genevieve, I need the report on the latest analyses now," he ordered, without even looking in her direction. "It's almost done, Mr. Silas. I just need to review the last details before sending it." He huffed impatiently. "I don't like delays." "You've always been punctual, so keep up that standard." Genevieve nodded quickly. She couldn't afford any mistakes. At the end of her shift, she rushed back to pick up Delilah, but on the way she stopped at the pharmacy to get another of her daughter's medications. The price was exorbitant, but necessary. Every penny she earned was carefully calculated to ensure that Delilah never went without her treatment. When they arrived home, Mrs. Carmen was already preparing a hot soup. The comforting aroma filled the small apartment, creating a homely atmosphere. "How was your day, my flower?" the elderly woman asked, as Delilah settled on the couch with her drawing pad. "Cool. I drew a lot today," she replied excitedly. Genevieve sat next to her daughter and looked at the colorful scribbles. Each one of them was a window into Delilah's particular world, an expression of her innocence and perception of what surrounded her. The girl picked up a blue pencil and started a new drawing, while Mrs. Carmen watched with a loving gaze. "You have an angel at home, Genevieve," said the lady, touching the mother's shoulder with tenderness. Her voice carried a quiet certainty, as if she knew that no matter what happened, Delilah would find a way. Genevieve averted her gaze to the window, observing the darkness outside. The city remained alive, with the headlights of cars reflecting on the glass panes, but inside that small apartment, the world seemed smaller, almost suffocating. She passed her hand over her face, trying to dissipate the weariness that weighed on her shoulders. "And angels always find a way," she repeated, but her voice did not carry the same confidence. She took a deep breath, looking at her own hands marked by hard work and sleepless nights. "I just hope that path is not too difficult for her." Lady Carmen gently squeezed Genevieve's shoulder, conveying a silent comfort. "Fate sometimes places us before battles that seem impossible, but there is nothing a mother wouldn't do for a child. And Delilah has you." Genevieve smiled wryly, grateful for those words, but felt a knot in her chest. That night before sleeping, she gathered the drawings scattered across the couch, each one more special than the other. There were traces of a colorful world that only Delilah could see, dreams that overflowed onto the paper. She knelt beside her daughter's bed and kissed her warm forehead, feeling the girl's peaceful breathing. She gently stroked her hair, allowing herself to imagine a future where Delilah could run free, unbound. Genevieve promised herself that she would protect her daughter from everything, and she could not even imagine what was to come. The morning began with an unexpected phone call. Genevieve was finishing preparing breakfast when her cell phone vibrated on the kitchen table. As soon as she answered, Lady Carmen's trembling voice filled the other side of the line. "Genevieve, forgive me, dear. I fell ill last night and don't think I can take care of Delilah today. Can you take her with you?" Genevieve's heart raced. Her job did not allow children, but leaving Delilah alone was not an option. Whenever she had no choice, she took her daughter to work. She took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "Don't worry, Lady Carmen. If you need anything, let me know. I'll figure it out." Delilah, sitting at the table with a colored pencil in her hand, looked at her mother with curiosity. "Mommy, is Lady Carmen okay?" Genevieve forced a smile. "Yes, my love. But today you'll come with me to work, okay?" The girl's eyes shone with excitement. She liked going to the place where her mother spent so many hours of the day. She took her sketchbook and nestled on the couch while Genevieve got ready in a hurry. When they arrived at the small hospital, Genevieve kept Delilah by her side, holding her little hand as they crossed the wide, well-lit corridors. She felt the stares of her colleagues, some sympathetic, others curious. Children were not allowed there, but given the circumstances, she hoped no one would complain. "You can stay here at my desk, drawing. If you need anything, let me know, okay?" Delilah nodded excitedly, opening her sketchbook on the desk and starting to scribble. The office environment was busy, but she seemed oblivious to everything, focused on her colorful strokes. On the other side of the room, Silas observed the scene with a cold, evaluating look. Genevieve had always been an impeccable employee, but he never liked her firm stance. He liked employees who bowed their heads, who followed orders without questioning. And Genevieve. Genevieve did not bend. He approached, crossing his arms next to her desk. Brought company again today, Genevieve." His tone carried a veiled insinuation. Genevieve looked up, maintaining a professional demeanor. It was an emergency. The daycare had no one available. Silas forced a dry smile. "I hope that won't interfere with your performance." "It won't." But it was already decided. Silas had plans for Genevieve. He needed a scapegoat for an internal scheme that had been going on for months, and she was perfect for that. An exemplary, reliable worker. No one would suspect her until it was too late. While Genevieve continued her work, Silas entered the storage room. His experienced hands opened the right shelf, taking boxes of restricted medications. He knew exactly where to hide them. On Genevieve's desk. As Delilah calmly drew, her gaze shifted for a moment. On the other side of the corridor, she saw Silas tampering with something. Her curious little eyes followed him as he hurriedly and discreetly placed something inside her mother's bag. The girl frowned but said nothing. Instead, she bent down and began drawing again. Minutes later, the sound of firm, hurried footsteps echoed through the floor. 2 security guards and a suited man emerged in the office, interrupting the routine like a thunderclap on a calm day. "Genevieve Winslow?" She looked surprised, slowly standing up. "Yes? We received a serious complaint. We need to search your bag." Genevieve's blood ran cold. "What? But why?" Silas approached, carrying a falsely rehearsed, indignant expression. "Someone reported that controlled medications are disappearing. These are high-value drugs for certain types of cancer. Unfortunately, we found evidence of irregularity in your sector." Her heart raced. "This is a mistake. I would never—" Before she could finish, one of the security guards was already opening her bag, and then the silence in the room turned into a tense murmur. There they were, vials of medication, expensive drugs for leukemia. Drugs that only employees with authorized access could handle. Genevieve brought her hand to her mouth, feeling her breath fail. Her desperate gaze met Delilah's, who watched everything, motionless, gripping the pencil tightly. "This is not possible. I didn't do this." The suited man, who introduced himself as the legal department director, cast a disapproving look. "These medications were found in your possession, Genevieve. This is theft." The words were like a blow. Theft. How could anyone think that of her? Her cold sweat trickled down her temples as Silas folded his arms, feigning indignation. "I always trusted you, Genevieve. But this is unacceptable. If your daughter needed these medicines so badly, we could have helped her in some other way." Delilah dropped her pencil and stood up, her voice weak but firm. "My mother didn't do it. I saw." Genevieve turned immediately, holding her daughter's hand. "Silence, dear." Despair gripped her throat. She knew there was no point in arguing. They had already decided her fate even before finding the false evidence. Silas gestured to the security guards. "Unfortunately, we'll have to call the authorities." The room spun around Genevieve. The air seemed dense, heavy, as if each breath required more effort than before. The murmur around her was an indistinct mixture of voices, hurried footsteps, and the metallic clink of the handcuffs tightening around her wrists. Her world, which until minutes ago was an exhausting but controlled routine, was now crumbling before her eyes. She tried to focus on something, anything that would help her keep her feet on the ground. The company's white walls, once cold and impersonal, now seemed to trap her in a maze with no exit. The gaze of the employees, some full of pity, others of distrust, burned on her skin like a silent judgment. She felt her legs falter, but forced herself to remain standing. She couldn't afford to weaken. Delilah, seated in the same place, watched everything without shedding a tear. Her little hand gripped the pencil against the paper, the strokes wavering but insistent. Amidst the chaos, the girl didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't run into anyone's arms. She just drew. Genevieve tried to smile, but her expression broke before it even formed. Her daughter, her little girl, was there, dealing with this in a way no child should. Her chest tightened, the pain growing into a suffocating knot. She wanted to run to Delilah, embrace her, tell her that everything would be all right, but she couldn't. All she could do was look. She had no idea that drawing would become her only hope. The sirens echoed from outside the building. The reflection of the red and blue lights flashed on the glass windows, creating a play of shadows throughout the room. Genevieve felt her stomach churn as the police officers approached. One of them spoke firmly, asking her to accompany them. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to understand what was happening. "Please, this is a mistake. I never stole anything. I always bought my daughter's medicine with my own money." "With the sweat of my labor," Genevieve shouted, but no one seemed to hear. Delilah, until then silent, exploded in despair. "Mommy!" Her frail voice cut through the air like a blade. She tried to run to Genevieve, but a firm hand held her back. Mrs. Carmen, who had arrived in a hurry, her eyes brimming with panic. "Calm down, my girl, calm down," the elderly woman whispered, enveloping the little one in a protective embrace. But Delilah struggled, her eyes filled with tears, her arms outstretched toward her mother. Genevieve turned, desperate, trying to soothe her daughter. "My love, everything will be all right. I promise." But how could she promise something when her own world was crumbling? Silas approached slowly, his eyes carrying a false disappointment. He shook his head and sighed heavily. "I really expected more from you, Genevieve." His voice was a poison disguised as compassion. His words were like a stab. Genevieve stared at him, unable to believe that someone could be so cruel. He knew she was innocent. He knew exactly what he was doing, but the mask he wore was perfect. The crowd of employees watched in silence, some murmuring among themselves, others averting their gaze. Genevieve wanted to scream, wanted to beg for someone to hear her, but all she found was indifference. The police officers pulled her toward the exit, and Delilah panicked. "Mommy, no, Mommy!" Her cries echoed down the hallway. Mrs. Carmen held the girl tightly, her trembling hands trying to offer a shelter that Delilah didn't want. The frail body of the child struggled against the elderly woman's embrace, her sobs coming uneven, laden with despair. But there was nothing Mrs. Carmen could do, nothing her words of consolation could change. "My dear, calm down. Everything will be all right." Her voice came choked, unconvincing even to herself. But Delilah didn't want protection. She didn't want arms to envelop her, or promises that everything would work out. She wanted her mother. She wanted to smell her, hear her voice saying everything was okay, that none of this was real. But Genevieve was being taken away, and no one did anything. The girl pressed her sketchbook against her chest, as if that object were the only anchor still connecting her to her mother. The crumpled paper against her chest rose and fell with her gasping breath, and tears dampened the colorful covers of the notebook. Her little fingers closed tightly around the edge of the paper, as if holding onto it with all her might could bring Genevieve back. And then Genevieve disappeared through the doors of the building, escorted by the police officers, her handcuffs reflecting the cold light of the hallways. Delilah didn't look away, her eyes fixed on the last sight of her mother being taken away. The girl's crying intensified, her body shaking so much that Mrs. Carmen feared she might faint. Delilah's world was crumbling before her eyes, but all that remained was a notebook. A notebook that now held more than just drawings. It held the last memory she had of her mother. The cell was cold and damp, lit only by the faint light coming through the rusty bars of the small window. Genevieve sat on the thin mattress, hugging her own body as she tried to control her breathing. The weight of the silence around her was suffocating, but nothing hurt more than Delilah's absence. The echo of her daughter's voice calling out to her still reverberated in her mind, like a ghost that refused to leave. She ran her hands over her face, feeling the moisture of the tears that wouldn't stop flowing. The idea of Delilah alone, not understanding what was happening, tightened her chest like an invisible chain. How would she sleep without her goodnight kiss? Who would hold her hand when she woke up scared in the middle of the night? The pain of being away from her daughter was a greater torture than any cold wall around her. The noise of the keys turning in the lock made her raise her gaze. A rigid-faced warden entered, holding a small paper package. Genevieve had no strength to ask what it was, merely watching as the envelope was tossed onto the thin bed. "Your case documents. Information about the case," the woman said impassively before walking away. Genevieve picked up the package with trembling fingers. As soon as she opened it, her stomach churned. The list of medications she was accused of stealing was there. She read each name with wide eyes, feeling the panic grow with every line. And then she saw it. They were Delilah's medicines, the same medications her daughter needed to continue treatment. Every bottle listed there was essential for Delilah's health, and now they were using this to destroy her. Genevieve felt a scream of despair stuck in her throat. The shock ran through her body like an electric current. This wasn't just a setup, this was cruelty in its purest form. They knew, Silas knew, it wasn't a coincidence. It was a calculated blow, a punishment planned with surgical precision. She clenched her fists, the paper crumpling between her fingers. Her body trembled, not just with anger, but with fear. Delilah needed those medicines, and now she wasn't there to ensure her daughter received the treatment. A sob escaped her throat, a low sound, but laden with despair. Genevieve folded in on herself, feeling the cold of the concrete floor penetrate her skin through the thin uniform. Her shoulders shook, her fingers pressing against her own head in a futile effort to contain the avalanche of thoughts consuming her. How could she protect Delilah from inside a cell? The air seemed heavier in there. The cell was small, suffocating, with damp walls that exuded a metallic smell of rust mixed with the sweat of endless days. The only window was a narrow slit high on the wall, letting in just a thread of pale light that barely illuminated the space. The thin mattress of the bed creaked with any movement, and the silence around was cut only by the echo of distant footsteps in the hallway and the occasional muffled noise of the guards' voices. Genevieve squeezed her eyes shut, trying to push away the images that rose in her mind. Delilah alone, scared, not knowing where to go, her daughter needing the medicines and having no one to get them. What if she got worse? What if there was no one to help her? Despair gripped her chest like an overwhelming weight that prevented her from breathing. She ran her hands over her wet face, her breathing uneven. Her thoughts jumbled, but one single certainty grew within her, stronger than fear, more intense than pain. She needed to get out of there. She needed to fight, needed to prove her innocence. Delilah couldn't pay for what she didn't do. Night fell heavily over Senora Carmen's small house. The clock on the wall ticked close to midnight, but the elderly woman couldn't sleep. On the sofa, curled under a thin blanket, Delilah breathed with difficulty. Her high fever tinged her cheeks red, and the brightness of her eyes was dull, distant. Her small hand, however, remained firm on the sketchbook, as if that object were the only anchor keeping her connected to her mother. Senora Carmen wet a cloth with cold water and gently pressed it to the girl's forehead. Heat radiated from the frail body, and worry tightened the elderly woman's chest. Delilah had hardly eaten anything since Genevieve's arrest, refusing to let go of the sketchbook and only murmuring her mother's name amid small, feverish delirium. "It will be okay, my dear," the old woman whispered, her voice choked. "Your mother will come back to you." Delilah's eyes opened slowly, heavy. She clutched the sketchbook to her chest, as if the world could collapse at any moment. "She promised she would stay with me," she murmured, her voice weak. Senora Carmen felt tears burn her eyes, but forced herself to smile. "And she will, my girl. We just need to be strong a little longer." The next morning, Senora Carmen made the difficult decision to visit Genevieve in prison. She walked slowly through the cold corridors of the prison, holding a bag with the few items she had managed to gather. Her heart weighed heavy in her chest, carrying not only the pain of her unjustly imprisoned friend, but also fear for Delilah's condition. When Genevieve appeared on the other side of the glass, her face was haggard, her eyes sunken with worry. As soon as she picked up the phone to speak to the old woman, her voice failed. "How is she?" Genevieve asked without preamble. Senora Carmen hesitated for a second, but she couldn't lie. "She's not well, my child. The fever spiked high yesterday. She misses you, Genevieve. She won't let go of the sketchbook for an instant." Genevieve closed her eyes, feeling the despair grow like a tight knot in her throat. "And the medicines. Is she taking them?" The old woman averted her gaze, pressing her lips together. "I'm trying, but I don't have access to everything she needs. Genevieve gripped the phone tighter, the knuckles of her fingers whitening with tension. Her breathing was heavy, her chest rising and falling unevenly as she tried to contain the growing panic. On the other side of the thick, cold glass, Senora Carmen's figure seemed smaller, aged by worry. The old woman held the phone with both hands, as if the object were a fragile link between them, a tenuous thread that kept them connected amid the tragedy. "Mrs. Carmen, for the love of God, promise me you'll find a way. I can't lose my daughter." Genevieve's voice came out trembling, laden with a despair she could no longer contain. Her eyes were brimming, and she felt her throat closing as if the very air were against her. The ensuing silence was cutting. Mrs. Carmen averted her gaze for a moment, as if needing strength to say what was to come. The elderly woman took a deep breath, her chest rising in a slow motion, and when she looked back at Genevieve, there was something in her eyes, a profound pain, but also an unwavering determination. "I promise, my child, but you must fight too." The old woman's voice was low, firm, full of a truth Genevieve could not ignore. Genevieve closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the coldness of the glass against her skin as she leaned her forehead against it. She could not fail. Not when Delilah depended on her. Not when her daughter was out there, needing the mother justice had taken from her. Genevieve held the prison phone with trembling hands, her heart pounding against her chest. On the other end of the line, the cold voice of the company representative echoed like an inescapable verdict. "Mrs. Genevieve Winslow, we regret to inform you that due to the severity of the accusations, your dismissal has been formalized. Your termination will be sent by mail, but according to company regulations, the loss of employment implies the immediate cancellation of your health plan." Genevieve's world shattered into pieces. Each word fell upon her like a crushing stone. Without the plan, Delilah would be left without treatment. The exams, appointments, medications, everything would become inaccessible. Her daughter was fighting against an aggressive disease, and now Genevieve had no means to help her. "No, you can't do this. My daughter needs that plan. She's a sick child." "We're sorry, ma'am, but those are the rules." The call was ended, leaving only the sound of suffocating silence around Genevieve. She clenched her fists, feeling a scream of despair rise up her throat. She was trapped, powerless, and now her daughter was even more vulnerable. At Mrs. Carmen's house, Delilah slept restlessly, her face bathed in cold sweat. The fever wouldn't break, and the tired eyes of the elderly woman reflected growing concern. The savings she had barely covered the most basic medicines. With each passing day, the girl's health became an hourglass emptying far too quickly. Delilah slowly opened her eyes, her breathing heavy. Her body was weak, but her small hands still held the notebook tightly. "Mrs. Carmen," she murmured with effort. The old woman leaned in, holding the girl's hand. "I'm here, my flower." Delilah's feverish eyes shone with determination. "My drawings they can help my mom." Mrs. Carmen forced a smile, trying to push away the lump in her throat. "Your drawings are beautiful, my dear, but now you need to rest." Delilah shook her head insistently. "No, someone needs to see." She took a deep breath, gathering strength. "I need to show someone who can help." The old woman hesitated, feeling a tightness in her chest. What could a child do against a system that crushed even the strongest? Against judges, lawyers, men in suits who spoke of laws as if they owned the fate of others. She knew the injustices of the world well, knew how it swallowed the weakest without mercy. Yet there was Delilah, fragile as a little bird, her skin sweaty from fever, her eyes sunken from exhaustion. And still, she didn't give up. "Mrs." Carmen lowered her gaze to the small hand that held the drawing notebook firmly. That was what sustained her, not pretty words or empty promises. It was her truth, printed in colorful scribbles. It was her way of shouting to the world that she had seen, that she knew the truth. The old woman felt a lump in her throat. How could that girl be so strong? How, in the midst of so much pain, did she still have the strength to want to fight? With a sigh, Mrs. Carmen squeezed her hand gently, but with the firmness of someone who wouldn't let her fall. "We'll find someone, my girl, I promise." Her voice came out choked up, but laden with a certainty that not even she knew she had until that moment. Delilah blinked slowly, her eyes burning, but her expression didn't change. She believed. And without knowing it, with that determined look and her unwavering hope, she had just taken the first step to change everything. The world didn't know it yet, but that girl, with a simple drawing notebook, was about to topple giants. The morning was grey when Meredith Vaughan parked her car in front of Mrs. Carmen's small house. The young lawyer, already hardened by the injustices of the system, pulled her leather briefcase from the passenger seat and stepped out, adjusting her blazer over her shoulders. She had come there for a simple reason, a community case involving an old document from the old woman's house, but had no idea that on that day her life would take an unexpected turn. Mrs. Carmen opened the door with a tired smile. "Come in, my child. It's good to see a friendly face." Meredith returned the smile and entered, feeling the comforting scent of tea and herbs wafting through the air. The house was small but welcoming, and conveyed a sense of home that Meredith hadn't felt in years. Since her father's death, she had lost that familiar warmth, replacing it with the coldness of courtrooms and the constant struggle for justice. As they talked, a faint murmur came from the room next door. Meredith frowned as she noticed the presence of a child on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. Her trained eyes quickly noticed the girl's excessive paleness, deep dark circles, and labored breathing. Even sick, the child clung to a drawing notebook with such force that it seemed to protect it from something invisible. "Mrs. Carmen sighed as she noticed the lawyer's curious gaze. "This is Delilah, my brave girl." The girl slowly opened her eyes and looked at Meredith with curiosity. Her voice came out weak but determined. "Can you help my mom?" Meredith felt a tightness in her chest at the innocent plea. She knelt by the couch, meeting those large, hopeful eyes. "What happened to your mother, dear?" Delilah pulled the notebook against her chest, as if gathering strength. "She's in jail, but she didn't do anything wrong. I know." The lawyer cast a quick glance at Mrs. Carmen, who sighed, sitting down on the rocking chair. "It's a long story, my daughter." Meredith stood up, taking one of the nearby chairs and sitting down patiently. "I have time." Mrs. Carmen began to recount everything, from the unjust accusation to Delilah's worsening health. Meredith listened attentively, her eyes fixed on the elderly woman, feeling indignation grow with each detail. Something about that story was wrong. Very wrong. It was when Delilah, even feverish, extended her notebook to the lawyer. "I saw what happened." Meredith took the notebook gently, flipping through the colorful drawings, and then she stopped. There, among innocent scribbles, were images that seemed like fragments of a hidden truth, drawn with small and steady hands. Each colored stroke carried more than simple childlike imagination. They were visual records of something that should never have happened. The drawing of a man leaning over her mother's purse, his hands too close in a gesture that shouldn't be there. The grim and furtive look of a supervisor, his oppressive presence captured in the unsure but detailed strokes. The room was silent. The air seemed heavy, weighed down by the discovery that now rested on the lawyer's shoulders. A shiver ran down Meredith's spine. Her eyes returned to the worn pages, analyzing every detail with the precision of someone who had just found a key piece in a puzzle that no one wanted to solve. Her heart pounded in her chest. This was more than a child's notebook. It was evidence. She raised her eyes to Delilah, who watched her expectantly, her lips slightly parted. The girl clutched the notebook to her chest, as if carrying something precious within it. Time seemed to stretch for a few seconds, and then Meredith gently took Delilah's small hand in hers, feeling the frail, feverish warmth of the girl. The lawyer looked deep into those eyes that, despite everything, still carried hope. Her voice came out soft but laden with conviction. "I believe you, and I'll help your mother." Delilah blinked a few times, and then, slowly, a small spark appeared in her eyes. For the first time, she felt that someone besides herself finally saw the truth. The next day, the metallic sound of prison doors echoed through the narrow corridors, followed by the creaking of the metal chair as Genevieve sat in front of the thick glass separating her from the outside world. Her eyes were dull, marked by exhaustion and the pain of endless days. When the guard signaled that her visitor had arrived, she didn't know what to expect. But when the young, determined figure of Meredith Vaughn appeared on the other side of the glass, something inside her ignited. The lawyer picked up the phone, her expression firm but gentle. "Genevieve, my name is Meredith Vaughn. I came because I believe you're innocent." For a moment, Genevieve remained still. How many people had told her they believed her? None. Since being arrested, she had felt invisible, crushed by the weight of the accusations. But there was something in Meredith's posture, in the assurance of her voice, that made her want to believe that, perhaps for the first time, someone was truly on her side. "Is my daughter okay?" was the first thing she asked, her voice choked. Meredith nodded. "Delilah is amazing. She's strong, but she misses you terribly." Genevieve lowered her head, tears threatening to fall. "She can't be without me. She needs me. And that's why I'm here," Meredith said firmly. "Genevieve, your case has many flaws. I've already found inconsistencies in the testimonies and company records. Genevieve frowned, feeling a flicker of hope. What did you find? Meredith opened a small notepad and scanned the pages. First, your supervisor, Mr. Silas, claimed there were several anonymous complaints about you, but there are no official records of that. Plus, his lifestyle doesn't match the salary he receives. Genevieve blinked, confused. What do you mean? The lawyer leaned forward slightly, as if it were a dangerous secret. He bought a luxury car last month. The man has a house that clearly wasn't financed by his salary alone. Furthermore, there are records of other suspicious terminations at the company, all related to employees who, coincidentally, had problems with him before being accused of irregularities. Genevieve felt a chill run up her spine. He hates me. He always looked at me as if I were a nuisance, but I never thought he'd be capable of doing this. Meredith pursed her lips, analyzing every reaction from the woman in front of her. Genevieve, I don't believe you were a random target. Silas wanted you to fall, and if there's a bigger scheme behind this, I'll find out. Across town, Delilah sat at Mrs. Carmen's small living room table, her hands holding a blue pencil. Her strokes were careful, despite the fever that still left her weak. With each new drawing, more details of what she had witnessed emerged. Mrs. Carmen walked past the girl, observing. What are you drawing, my flower? Delilah looked at the elderly woman with an unusual seriousness for a child. I'm showing what happened to Mum. The old woman sighed, caressing the girl's hair. You're a very smart little girl, Delilah. Delilah resumed drawing, biting her lip in concentration, and then her pencil stopped for a second. Mrs. Carmen, can you take these drawings to the lady who wants to help Mum? The old woman smiled, feeling a deep emotion wash over her. Yes, my girl, I'll take them. Across town, Meredith typed furiously on her laptop. Each piece she uncovered led her deeper into that labyrinth of lies. And now, a certainty was growing inside her. Genevieve was innocent. And Delilah, with her little colored scribbles, could be the key to proving it. Meredith spent the night in her small office, surrounded by piles of documents and hospital records. The information she had obtained with some difficulty was extensive, but something began to stand out. The inventory report showed a suspicious pattern. Expensive medications disappeared in small batches over the months, but never drew enough attention for an uproar. The signature responsible for approving each of those reports. Silas. She massaged her temples, trying to organize the timeline. First, employees were accused of theft without concrete evidence. Then, the diverted medications simply vanished from the records without clear traces of where they ended up. This wasn't an isolated case. It was a well-planned scheme. Meredith took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment. She had to prove that Genevieve was not guilty and, moreover, expose the true web of corruption within the company. But for that, she needed something solid, something beyond documents. The next day, she sat in Mrs. Carmen's living room, observing Delilah closely. The girl was lying on the couch, still feverish, but clutching her notebook as if it were her greatest treasure. Do you have more drawings for me? Meredith asked softly. Delilah nodded with a weak motion and opened the pages. Meredith slid her eyes over the colorful images, and then something caught her attention. Among the childish strokes, there were boxes stacked in a corner, with a label drawn in a simplified but legible way. Julia took one of the reports and placed it next to the drawing, analyzing every detail with meticulous attention. At first, it was just a heap of childish scribbles, vibrant colors mixed with shaky strokes, but looking more carefully, everything began to make sense. In the midst of the crooked lines and seemingly random figures, the name of the medication missing from the stocks was there, written in shaky letters, scribbled by a child who had no idea of the importance of what they had witnessed. A shiver ran up her spine. Meredith gripped the paper between her fingers, feeling the rough texture of the colored pencil against the sheet. It wasn't a coincidence. The drawing clearly showed a man leaning over Genevieve's purse, his hands positioned as if placing something inside it, and then something else caught her attention. Behind Silas's figure, scribbled in darker tones, was what appeared to be a shelf filled with small bottles. The stock. Meredith's eyes widened. Delilah hadn't only witnessed Silas tampering with Genevieve's purse, but, unbeknownst to her, had drawn the exact location where the drugs were before they disappeared. She closed the notebook slowly, her heart pounding against her chest. The weight of the discovery tightened her stomach. What she held in her hands wasn't just a drawing, it was a silent testimony, a wordless confession, a crucial piece to shatter the sham that condemned Genevieve. Meredith swallowed hard and looked at Delilah, who watched her with big, hopeful eyes. The proof she needed was there, in the drawings of an 8-year-old girl. Meredith spread the drawings out on the table, arranging them like puzzle pieces. The dim lamplight cast shadows over the papers, where childish strokes told a much bigger story than any official report could reveal. The lawyer's hands moved with precision, separating Delilah's scribbles by date, trying to fit them into the company's timeline. The drawings were always made whenever the girl was at the company, when her mother couldn't leave her with her neighbor. At first, the drawings seemed innocent, shadows of boxes, hospital corridors, faceless figures that appeared and disappeared. But then something started to stand out. Whenever a drug disappeared from the stock, Delilah would draw the same environment, but with different details. It was as if, unknowingly, she was recording small changes over the days. Meredith picked up one of the papers and compared it to an official hospital report. The disappearance of a specific batch coincided exactly with the day Delilah had drawn a silhouette next to the boxes. The lawyer's heart raced. Delilah had recorded the scheme in real time. Meredith took a deep breath and opened her laptop. She needed to know more about Silas. If he was involved in something this big, this couldn't be the first case. With nimble fingers, she typed his name into the search bar and began to analyze his professional history. The results came within minutes. Before working at the hospital, he had passed through 2 other companies in the sector. At both, he had left before internal investigations uncovered financial diversions. Meredith's eyes narrowed. He was a repeated pattern, a ghost who sucked resources and vanished before being caught. The lawyer leaned back in her chair, absorbing it all. The scheme was bigger than it seemed, and Delilah unwittingly had documented crucial pieces of the crime. She picked up her phone and dialed Mrs. Carmen's number. As soon as the elderly woman answered, her voice carried concern. "Meredith, my child, has something happened?" The lawyer took a deep breath. "Mrs. Carmen, I need to see Delilah again. I think her drawings might be the key to proving everything." On the other end of the line, there was a brief silence, the kind of silence that weighs, that precedes something important. Meredith clutched the phone tighter, her gaze fixed on the scattered papers on the table. Her chest rose and fell slowly, as if trying to control the agitation growing inside her. Then, finally, Mrs. Carmen's firm voice broke the silence, laden with an unwavering certainty. "Then come, dear, the girl has always said she could help." The words echoed in the small office. Meredith felt a shiver run through her skin. For a moment, she looked at the papers again, absorbing the magnitude of what she had before her. If she was right, Delilah hadn't just witnessed a crime, she could take down an entire criminal scheme. She took a deep breath, letting her fingers glide across the table before standing up. The air felt different now, heavier. The night outside stretched through the window, the city illuminated by artificial lights that blinked like urban stars. But there in that office, the lampshade cast shadows over the documents, amplifying the gravity of what was about to happen. If Silas or anyone involved found out what Delilah knew, that made her a target. Meredith closed her eyes for a moment, gathering the courage she knew she would need. She grabbed her bag and the evidence she had gathered. She couldn't hesitate. The girl was the key piece, and the only way to protect her was to act before someone tried to silence her. A few minutes later, Meredith felt a chill run up her spine when she received the first anonymous call that morning. She answered hesitantly, and on the other end of the line, a distorted voice whispered, "Stop snooping where you shouldn't, lawyer. This isn't your problem." The phone went silent before Meredith could respond. She stood still for a moment, feeling the weight of the threat. She knew this moment would come. The deeper she dug, the more uncomfortable it became for those involved. But she didn't expect retaliation to come so quickly. Hours later, another blow. One of the employees who had previously agreed to testify about Silas's suspicious behavior sent a short message. "Sorry, I can't talk about it anymore." Other testimonies began to change. People who had previously shown indignation now hesitated, stammered, backed down. The fear was palpable. Meredith closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. This meant she was on the right track. Silas knew she was getting close to the truth, but it wasn't just her suffering the consequences. At Mrs. Carmen's house, Delilah was worsening by the day. Her already frail body seemed lighter than ever. The fever refused to subside, and her dull eyes reflected a profound weariness. Still, she wouldn't let go of her sketchbook. "I need to keep going, Mrs. Carmen," the girl murmured, holding the pencil with trembling hands. The elderly woman caressed her hair gently, her heart broken. "My flower, let's take care of your health." Delilah shook her head. "My mommy needs me." In the late afternoon, the doorbell rang. "Mrs." Carmen opened the door to a man in a tie holding a clipboard. The cold look indicated he didn't bring good news. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm here on behalf of the hospital where Delilah is receiving treatment. The payments are weeks behind." "Mrs." Carmen pursed her lips, her stomach churning. "I know, but we're trying to resolve." The man sighed, impassive. "I understand your situation, but we need an immediate payment, otherwise services may be interrupted." The world around Mrs. Carmen spun. "But she needs the medication, the hospitalization. We're talking about a sick child." The man just looked at her, emotionless. "Rules are rules, ma'am." Delilah coughed on the couch, the sound faint and painful. "Mrs." Carmen closed her eyes, feeling the tears burn. Meredith needed to act quickly. It wasn't just Genevieve's freedom at stake. It was Delilah's life. Meredith parked the car on a discreet street, checking the address scribbled on a piece of paper. The man she was about to meet was not listed in the company's official records, but she found him on a former employees forum. His name was Thaddeus Calloway, and he had been fired months earlier after questioning irregularities in the stocks. She rang the doorbell and waited. The man who opened the door seemed tense, his eyes moving cautiously even before recognizing who she was. "If you've come to talk about that little hospital, I don't know anything," he said, already trying to close the door. Meredith held the frame firmly. "I know you were fired after questioning Silas." Thaddeus hesitated. "So what? That doesn't prove anything." "It proves you knew what was going on," Meredith insisted. "I'm not here to get you in trouble, Thaddeus. I just want justice. An innocent woman is in prison, and a child is on the brink of death because this dirty scheme wasn't stopped before." The mention of the child made the man bite his lip. He looked around, checking if anyone was watching them before opening the door fully. "Come in, but I can't talk for long." At the hospital, Delilah trembled in her bed, her breathing irregular. "Mrs." Carmen held her hand, murmuring soft words, while the nurse checked her vitals. The girl was deteriorating too quickly. Between weak sobs, Delilah tried to raise her notebook. "Mrs. Carmen, I need to show you the drawings before it's too late." The elderly woman held the notebook gently, tears in her eyes. "We'll show them, my flower, but now you rest." Delilah blinked slowly, as if each movement was an immense effort. And then her body went limp. The monitor alarm went off. "We need a team here now." The nurse's voice cut through the air like a sharp blade, charged with urgency and despair. The sound of the alarms mixed with the noise of hurried footsteps, the gurney being pushed down the hallway as the medical team moved in sync, trying to stabilize Delilah. Mrs. Carmen felt the ground disappear from under her feet. Her heart raced, each beat echoing like thunder within her chest. She tried to follow them, but her knees failed, and she had to lean against the cold wall to avoid falling. Her tear-filled, wide-open eyes couldn't look away from the scene. Delilah was so fragile, so small on that bed surrounded by white-coated professionals. The gurney disappeared through the double doors of the intensive care unit, and the hollow sound of the doors closing struck the elderly woman like a blow. She couldn't do anything. She couldn't hold her. She couldn't ensure she would be all right. All that was left was agonizing waiting. At the same time, in a forgotten corner of the waiting room on the chair where Delilah had been sitting minutes before, the little notebook of drawings remained untouched. The pages, filled with childish scribbles, carried something much greater than simple innocent strokes. They were silent witnesses to something no one wanted to see. And while Delilah fought for her life in a hospital bed, her drawings began to reveal the truth that could change everything. The monitors around Delilah's bed emitted rhythmic beeps, but the atmosphere inside the room was one of pure despair. The girl was motionless, her frail little body connected to wires and tubes that seemed too large for her. Mrs. Carmen remained by the bedside, holding her cold hand tightly, as if her presence could prevent Delilah's life from slipping through her fingers. The doctor, a serious-faced woman with a tired expression, adjusted one of the IV drips before turning to Mrs. Carmen. Her situation is critical. We're doing our best, but without the right medication, her body is fighting against itself. Mrs. Carmen felt her throat tighten. And there's nothing more you can do? The doctor sighed. We've done everything in our power with the available resources. If we can't get the right medicines, I'm afraid Delilah won't be able to hold on for much longer. The elderly woman lowered her eyes to the sleeping girl, feeling the tears burn. Delilah had always been strong. She had always smiled, even on the toughest days. But now time was running out. In prison, Genevieve paced back and forth inside the cramped cell, feeling the anguish grow like a poison. The little hope she had left was crushed when a guard appeared, her expression impassive. "You have a phone call." With trembling fingers, Genevieve picked up the phone. As soon as she heard Mrs. Carmen's voice, she felt the ground vanish from under her feet. "Genevieve, my child, Delilah." Her world shattered in two. "No, don't tell me. She's very weak, dear. The doctors are trying, but without the right medicines, the situation is deteriorating rapidly." Genevieve pressed the phone against her face, trying to contain the scream rising in her throat. "Get me out of here. For God's sake, my daughter needs me." But no one was listening, no one cared. On the other side of the city, inside the hospital building, Silas closed the door behind him with a metallic click and quickly locked it, making sure no one could enter. The air inside the room was stuffy, laden with the smell of aged paper and files stored for too long. A dim light flickered on the ceiling, casting trembling shadows over the metal shelves filled with folders and boxes of documents. He ran his tongue over his dry lips, his sweaty hands flipping through the reports hastily, his trembling fingers turning each page. His heart was beating too fast, the echo of footsteps in the hallway outside making him paranoid. If someone came in there, he would be done for. His eyes darted as he saw what he was looking for. The reports with the exact records of the stolen drugs movements. The same information Meredith now had in her hands. Every number, every name, a sentence of condemnation for him. His body went rigid, and he felt a chill run down his spine. If this evidence reached the court, there would be no escape. With trembling fingers, he plunged his hand into his pocket and pulled out a silver lighter. The blue flame flickered as he spun the metal wheel, briefly illuminating his somber expression. If that evidence disappeared, nothing could incriminate him. He stared at the papers for one more second, feeling the heat of the flame too close. If he destroyed everything there, Genevieve would continue paying for a crime she never committed. He just needed to finish what he had started, and this time he couldn't fail. The hospital corridor seemed colder than usual. Mrs. Carmen sat on one of the plastic chairs, her trembling hands holding a cup of cold coffee she could no longer drink. Delilah's room door was ajar, and the silence inside was heavy. That's when a man in a dark suit approached, holding a clipboard. He cleared his throat before speaking, his voice dry, devoid of empathy. "Mrs. Carmen, I need to inform you that the costs of Delilah's treatment have already exceeded the emergency assistance limit. If payment is not made by tomorrow, unfortunately, we will not be able to continue the care." The elderly woman's stomach churned. She rose abruptly, her eyes wide. "But you can't just stop. We're talking about a child. She may not survive without this treatment." The man pursed his lips, looking away. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but rules are rules." Mrs. Carmen leaned against the wall to keep from falling. The girl was getting worse every day, and now she wouldn't even have a chance to fight. Meanwhile, in her office, Meredith typed furiously on the computer, trying to access the company's documents. But suddenly her screen flickered and a message appeared. "Access denied. File removed." The lawyer's heart raced. Every report she had obtained, every piece of evidence that could prove the setup against Genevieve, was disappearing before her eyes. Silas was covering his tracks. She picked up the phone and quickly dialed one of her contacts at the company. When the call was answered, the voice on the other end was low, almost a whisper. "Meredith, I can't help anymore. All the files are being deleted, and they're monitoring who tries to access them. If I continue, I'll be fired too." Meredith's blood ran cold. She was running out of time and out of evidence. At Mrs. Carmen's house, a noise coming from the living room made the old woman start. She ran to see what had happened and found Delilah's notebook on the floor, the pages torn, some completely destroyed. Her heart stopped. The acrid smell of burnt paper still hung in the air, mingling with the stifling tension that gripped the room. The shadows of the shelves trembled under the faint light of the flickering lamp. Someone had entered. Someone had tried to erase the only remaining evidence. The charred papers on the table told a silent story, a desperate attempt to make the truth disappear. But the damage was not complete. Something could still be saved. On the other side of the city, inside the prison, Genevieve clutched the small photo of Delilah she kept in the pocket of her worn uniform. Her trembling fingers slid over the frayed edge of the already crumpled paper, her eyes fixed on the image of her daughter. The longing was a weight that crushed her every day, every lonely night when she wondered if Delilah was okay, if she was safe, if she still remembered her voice. Her body was weak. The food served in prison never really sustained her, and the sleepless nights left her eyes sunken, weighed down by the weight of tears that never ceased. The cold of the cell seemed to seep into her bones, making it even harder to find the strength to go on. She took a deep breath, but the air came heavy into her lungs. Maybe it's better if I give up, she whispered to herself, her voice almost non-existent, lost among the cracks of her hope. Fighting no longer seemed to make sense. The world wasn't listening to her. The truth was fading like the embers of a dying fire. And Delilah was so far away. Delilah's breathing was weak, but her trembling fingers still held the pencil. Even with her vision blurred by fever, she struggled to trace the lines on the paper. Mrs. Carmen tried to stop her, but the girl whispered, determined, "I need to finish, before it's too late." The old woman, her heart tight, simply held her hand and waited. When the drawing was done, Delilah pointed to one of the scribbled figures in the corner of the page. Mrs. Carmen frowned. "Who's this, my flower?" Before Delilah could answer, a nurse changing the girl's IV drip looked over the old woman's shoulder and froze when she saw the drawing. "Oh my God," she murmured, putting her hand to her mouth. Mrs. Carmen turned to the woman, alarmed. "Do you know this person?" The nurse nodded slowly, her eyes wide. "Yes, that man works at the hospital, but there are rumors that he's involved in drug diversion. If Delilah drew him, maybe he's also part of the scheme." Meanwhile, Meredith was rifling through the company's old files in search of something Silas hadn't been able to erase. Her fingers slid over the dusty papers until one document caught her attention. A map of the security cameras. Most had already been replaced or turned off, but a small sector, an old storage area, still had a working camera. The attorney's heart raced. If no one bothered to erase the records from that camera, perhaps the footage was still available. Meredith picked up the phone and called a contact at the company. "I need access to recordings from an old camera. Now." At the hospital, Mrs. Carmen gripped Delilah's drawing so tightly that her fingers creased the paper's edges. Her heart pounded in her chest as her eyes traced every detail of the childish scribble, seeing beyond the uneven colored lines. It wasn't just a drawing. It was a missing piece of a dangerous puzzle. The elderly woman looked around, feeling a chill run up her spine. The children's ward was silent except for the distant murmur of nurses' conversations and the rhythmic beep of heart monitors. But that silence didn't bring peace. It brought unease. The weight of the discovery suffocated the atmosphere. If this man was part of it, then the scheme was much bigger than they thought. She looked at the drawing again. Delilah's strokes now seeming more evident, as if they were screaming a truth ignored until that moment. The man depicted there, with broad shoulders and a cold expression, was a figure no one expected to be involved. The air seemed heavier, as if something invisible hovered over them. If the truth was revealed, those responsible would not remain idle. Lady Carmen took a deep breath, feeling her chest tighten with a bad premonition. "Meredith, dear, we need to act quickly," she murmured, her voice trembling but firm. "They will try to prevent this." The lawyer nodded, her eyes fixed on the scattered papers in front of her. Every second lost was an opportunity for the enemy to erase the tracks. And now, more than ever, they knew they were not just dealing with a sham. They were facing something much darker. Meredith spread out and looked again at the drawings made by the child, analyzing every detail with redoubled attention. Now that she knew Delilah had captured something much bigger than she imagined, she needed to look at those scribbles with new eyes. As she organized the pages in chronological order, a pattern began to emerge. There was always a recurring detail in the scenes Delilah drew. Small trucks, parked behind the hospital, always at the end of the night. In some pages, the shadows of men appeared next to the boxes, as if they were carrying something out of the building. Meredith's keen gaze noticed something else. In the more recent drawings, one of the dark figures seemed to be wearing a badge with a symbol similar to the company's. Her heart raced. That was no coincidence. Picking up the phone, she dialed the former employee who had given her information about Silas. "Thaddeus, I need you to tell me something. Do you remember if there was any strange truck movement at night?" The man's voice came tense from the other end of the line. "Yes. Sometimes we saw shipments being removed after hours, but no one talked about it. If anyone asked, Silas would change the subject." Meredith gripped the phone harder. "Have you ever heard of anything related to illegal drug sales?" There was a long silence before Thaddeus answered. "I heard rumors. They said high-cost drugs simply disappeared from inventory and reappeared on the black market. But there was never any proof." Delilah's drawings were the proof. As Meredith put the puzzle together, Genevieve faced her own hell inside the prison. She was escorted to the visiting room, where a well-dressed lawyer with a pile of documents in front of her awaited her. He smiled coldly. "Genevieve, my client, I've come to bring an opportunity. We can ensure that your sentence is reduced if you accept a deal and confess to the crime." Genevieve froze. "Confess? But I'm innocent." The lawyer leaned over the table. "If you accept, you can be out in a few years. But if you keep insisting on this story of innocence, the judge may not be so generous." Genevieve felt a chill run down her spine, a shiver that ran through her body like a silent warning. This was it. They wanted to break her, bend her to the point of giving up, make her weak enough to accept a guilt that wasn't hers. They wanted her to surrender. They wanted her to bear on her shoulders the weight of the real criminals, to disappear into the shadows of a cell, while the truly guilty remained untouched, free. She closed her eyes for a moment, and in the darkness, Delilah appeared in her mind. Her little warrior, fighting to survive in a hospital, surrounded by machines and doctors facing something much bigger than any child should face. Genevieve's heart tightened, and if she gave up, what would happen to her daughter? She took a deep breath, feeling the cold air enter her lungs, fueling something inside her that she had almost forgotten she had. Strength, determination. She wasn't just a wronged prisoner. She was a mother. Her eyes opened again, and something inside them had changed. The pain and fear were still there, but now they were accompanied by something stronger, a flame they couldn't extinguish. She raised her face, firm, her voice coming out clearer, stronger than before. "I won't plead guilty." The silence that followed seemed to stretch through the small space of the cell. The game wasn't over yet. And now, Genevieve was ready to fight. Meredith pressed the headphones against her temples as the computer screen displayed grainy footage from the old recordings. Her contact inside the company had managed to access the files from the only camera Silas hadn't had time to erase. The video was dated the night Genevieve was accused, and every second of that recording could change everything. The lawyer increased the screen brightness and watched closely. The storage sector corridor was almost empty, illuminated only by dim lamps casting elongated shadows on the walls. Then a figure entered the frame. Meredith held her breath. It was Silas. He looked around, making sure no one was nearby. Then, with a quick and precise motion, he took a small package of medicine from the pocket of his lab coat and stuffed it into Genevieve's purse, which was on one of the lockers. The lawyer's stomach turned. There was the proof. The incontestable evidence that Genevieve had been framed. But that wasn't all. As Silas finalized the setup, another figure entered the hallway. Meredith's eyes widened. It was the man from Delilah's drawing. He and Silas exchanged quick words, unfortunately without audio. Meredith couldn't hear. But then the stranger handed a thick envelope to Silas, who hid it in his pocket and hurried out. The lawyer paused the video. Every detail fit now. Delilah had drawn this scene, unaware of the importance of what she had witnessed, but this still wasn't enough. Meredith opened another file, the financial reports she managed to dig up from old documents. She began to cross-reference information, comparing the company's purchase and inventory records over the past few months. What she found was an absurd pattern of overbilling. Expensive medicines were recorded as being purchased in large quantities, but most never made it to storage. She looked back at Delilah's drawings and noticed a detail she had previously ignored. The boxes in the trucks had symbols identical to those found in the overbilled batches. It was definitive proof. Genevieve had not only been used as a scapegoat. It was not an isolated case, an administrative error, or a simple drug diversion scheme. It was something much bigger. The criminal network spread like deep roots in rotten soil, infiltrating the backstage of an already fragile system. Silas not only stole the medicines, he resold them at exorbitant prices to an underground network, denying treatment to those who needed it most. Meredith passed her hand over her face, feeling the cold skin under her own fingers. Her blood had run cold. She knew she was dealing with something dirty, but this meant there were many more people involved, people who not only diverted medicines, but enriched themselves at the expense of vulnerable patients suffering. And they were willing to do anything to keep it buried. The weight of the discovery made the air around her denser. Her eyes returned to the documents scattered across the table. The numbers matched. The evidence was there. If she didn't act quickly, they could disappear. Without hesitation, Meredith picked up the phone and dialed. Each second of waiting seemed to drag on. When the call was answered, her voice came out firm, but her heart pounded against her ribs. She knew that from that moment on, there was no turning back. "I have proof, and we need to act now." On the other end of the line, the response came quickly. How long before they realize? Meredith took a deep breath. Maybe they already know. Meredith, reviewing each piece of evidence with meticulous attention. The images from the old footage, the tampered inventory records, and Delilah's drawings were organized in folders, ready to be presented in court. Her heart pounded in her chest. After so much effort, she finally had everything she needed to bring down the sham that had destroyed Genevieve's life. But as she delved deeper into her investigation of those involved in the scheme, an unsettling detail caught her attention. Although the judge overseeing the case had an impeccable reputation and showed impartiality, there were indications that other members of the judicial system might be working behind the scenes to protect the real culprits. Meredith frowned and continued her investigation. Some prosecutors and advisors linked to the case had a history of favorable rulings for large hospital corporations, and one in particular had worked directly on cases involving drug diversion scandals in the past. Meredith's blood ran cold. If there were forces within the court itself trying to manipulate the case, Genevieve might not have a fair chance, even with all the evidence in her favor. Before she could fully process the gravity of the situation, her phone vibrated. It was Mrs. Carmen, and her voice came out trembling on the other end of the line. "Meredith, my daughter, Delilah wants to speak with you." The lawyer felt a tightness in her chest. "Is she okay?" There was a brief silence before the elderly woman replied. "She's weak, but she insists she needs to go to court." Meredith frowned. "She can't leave the hospital in that condition, Mrs. Carmen. Her health comes first. She says she has something important to show the judge." The lawyer felt a chill run down her spine. "What?" On the other end of the line, Delilah coughed, a weak, cutting sound that made Meredith's chest tighten. The girl was exhausted, but her voice, though feeble, carried a firmness that seemed much greater than her small body could bear. "I made one last drawing." Her breathing was irregular, but she continued without hesitation. "He needs to see it." "Only him." Meredith gripped the phone tighter, her fingers clenching the device as if that invisible thread connecting her to the girl was the only thing preventing everything from crumbling. The gravity of the moment hit her fully. Delilah had already proven countless times that her drawings were more than just childish scribbles. They were silent testimonies, records of something adults had ignored, but which she, with her innocence and keen eye, had managed to see. Meredith closed her eyes for a moment, trying to process. What could be in that last drawing? What had Delilah seen? If she said it could change everything, then it would. She opened her desk drawer and grabbed her car keys. She needed to find a way to take her to court. She couldn't waste any more time. "Delilah, listen to me," she said, her voice firm yet gentle. "Do you trust me?" The reply came low but loaded with certainty. "Yes." Meredith took a deep breath, feeling her heart race. Then there was no other choice. That girl needed to be in front of the judge, and Meredith would move the world to make sure it happened. The fine rain trickled down the windows of the cafe, where Meredith waited anxiously. Her fingers drummed on the table, her gaze fixed on the door. Time was running out, and every minute counted. If Thaddeus didn't show up, it could be the last chance to secure a solid testimony for the trial. The cafe door opened and he walked in, his eyes scanning the room as if he feared being followed. His clothes were rumpled, and his expression carried a mix of hesitation and desperation. Meredith stood up, beckoning him over. "You came." Thaddeus pulled the chair and sat facing her, taking a deep breath. "I thought a lot before deciding. I know I'm getting into huge trouble if I testify against them." Meredith leaned forward. "You can't go back now, not after everything you know." He rubbed his face with his hands before nodding. "You're right. I'll tell everything." Meredith grabbed the recorder and placed it on the table. "I want you to start from the beginning. How did the scheme work?" Thaddeus took a deep breath before starting. "The diversions have been happening for years. At first they were small amounts, easy to cover up. But when Silas took over the sector, everything changed. He turned the diversion into something systematic." Meredith's eyes were attentive. "And how was that done?" "The incoming record of the drugs was tampered with even before the products arrived at the stockpile. The batches were separated and, in the middle of the night, transported out of the company. All of this happened without drawing attention." Thaddeus paused and lowered his voice. "And there's more. Silas was never the real boss of this scheme." Meredith felt a chill run up her spine. There was something in the way Thaddeus spoke, in the excessive caution of his gestures, that made her hold her breath. Who was above him? Her voice came out low but charged with tension. Thaddeus looked around as if fearing someone might overhear them, even there in an apparently secure room. His body was rigid, his fingers tapping lightly on the table before finally letting out the answer Meredith already feared to hear. "The company directors." He paused and leaned in a little closer, his tone even darker. "They knew everything. In the hospital, Delilah tried to sit up in bed, but her frail body simply didn't respond as she wanted. The effort made her arms tremble and her lips lose some color. Mrs. Carmen immediately adjusted the pillows behind her, her gaze heavy with worry. "My flower, you can't overexert yourself." Delilah pursed her lips, her expression determined despite her weariness. "I need to go to court, it's important." The elderly woman held her small hand, feeling the feverish warmth on her skin. Delilah averted her gaze for a moment, biting her lip, as if deciding something within herself. Then, hesitantly, she slipped her hand under the pillow and pulled out a small, crumpled envelope. Mrs. Carmen frowned, surprised. "What is this?" Delilah swallowed hard. "My last drawing." Her voice came out almost a whisper. The old woman carefully opened the envelope. Her eyes fell on the paper, and the air seemed to leave her lungs all at once. Her heart raced. Delilah had kept the most important detail of the whole story. The courtroom was filled with an almost palpable tension. Meredith adjusted her documents on the defense table, casting a quick glance at Genevieve, who kept her gaze fixed on the man sitting in the witness chair. Thaddeus Calloway, the former employee of the facility, took a deep breath before resting his hands on the bench and facing the judge. He cleared his throat, his fingers trembling slightly. "I worked there for 8 years, long enough to realize that something was wrong. But it was only in the last 3 years that the diversion of medicines became a systematic operation." Meredith stood up, walking slowly around the courtroom. "Can you explain how it worked?" Thaddeus nodded, wetting his lips. "It all started with the entry of products into the company. Some batches were overpriced and never made it into the official records. Instead, they were separated and discreetly removed from the warehouse. The security cameras in the main sector didn't capture those moments because Silas, the supervisor, controlled the system. He manipulated the programming so that during the removal hours, no recording was made." The prosecutor, a well-dressed gray-suited man, crossed his arms. "Do you have proof of this?" Meredith took a folder from the table and walked over to the judge, handing him the transcripts of the recordings her team had managed to recover. "Yes, Your Honor. These images show that, on the nights when the diversions occurred, The recording logs show failures precisely during the hours of the suspicious movements. The judge flipped through the documents, frowning. "Proceed, Mr. Calloway." Thaddeus took a deep breath and continued. The diverted medicines were not sold randomly. There was an organized network that distributed them on the black market. I didn't know exactly who was in charge of this network, but I saw Silas receiving envelopes regularly, probably payments for the service. Genevieve listened to every word, her hands clenched in her lap, her heart pounded in her chest. It was then that Meredith approached the table and pulled out a set of colorful papers. She held them up slightly. "Mr. Calloway, you mentioned that the diversions happened at specific times. I want you to look at these drawings and tell me what you see." Thaddeus took the papers with a curious look, and as soon as he saw the first drawing, his eyes widened. This looks like the loading and unloading area." Meredith nodded, turning over the next drawing. "And this one?" He frowned. "It's a childish representation, but those men are pushing boxes into a truck. That's exactly how it happened." The lawyer turned over another drawing, where a silhouette stood out holding an envelope. "And this one?" Thaddeus hesitated for a moment before letting out a heavy sigh. "That's what I saw. Silas receiving payment for the diversions." The murmur in the audience intensified. Meredith turned to the judge, holding Delilah's drawings firmly. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the purest evidence we have. Delilah, a child, witnessed all of this without realizing it. And without anyone paying attention, she recorded details that now help us understand the entire criminal operation." The prosecutor cleared his throat. "But this doesn't prove that the accused didn't participate in the crimes." It was then that the courtroom door opened and Mrs. Carmen entered, pushing Delilah's wheelchair. The girl was pale, but her gaze carried an uncommon determination for her age. "I can prove it," she whispered, holding a new drawing between her fingers. The judge watched the scene in silence for a moment before nodding. "Bring the girl closer." Mrs. Carmen brought her to the front, and Meredith crouched down beside her. "Delilah, can you show us what you brought?" The girl raised the sheet of paper. It was one last drawing, and what was there would change everything. In court, Delilah held the drawing with trembling hands, focused, as if each stroke were an essential piece to reveal the truth. Her breathing was weak, but the determination in her gaze left no doubt. She knew that this would be the most important of all her drawings. Mrs. Carmen, sitting beside the girl, watched in silence. The old woman's heart tightened every time Delilah paused for a moment to catch her breath. The effort was too much for her, but nothing in the world would make the girl give up. "Are you sure you want to do this, my flower?" "Mrs.?" Carmen asked with a voice laden with concern. Delilah nodded slowly, without taking her eyes off the paper. "It's the only way." In the courthouse hallway, Meredith hurried along, clutching a set of documents. With each new detail revealed in the case, the judge's reaction became harder to predict. In the early days of the trial, he seemed convinced of Genevieve's guilt. But now, something was changing. During the last session, Meredith noticed how he pursed his lips upon hearing the testimonies, how his eyebrows furrowed slightly when Thaddeus revealed that the company's directors were involved. More than that, she saw the judge stare at Delilah's drawings for too long. If he was starting to doubt the accusation, there was hope. But they needed to make it to the end. It was then that her phone vibrated. Meredith stopped and answered, her chest tightening. "Counselor." The voice of the contact at the prosecutor's office was urgent. "There are people worried about the girl. Sources say they're not going to let Delilah testify tomorrow." Meredith's blood ran cold. "You're saying that?" "I don't have details, but if I were you, I'd double the security around her." Meredith swallowed hard, ending the call. Her gaze shot towards the room where Delilah finished her drawing. They were running out of time, and the criminals would do anything to prevent the truth from coming out. The sun had barely risen when Meredith left her firm's building, her cell phone pressed against her ear as she walked briskly towards her car. The morning air was heavy, laden with a sense of urgency that tightened her chest. "Mrs. Carmen, are you ready?" The elderly woman on the other side of the line sighed. "Yes, my child. But since early on, I've seen a car parked near the house. Someone is watching us." Meredith's blood ran cold. "Don't go out yet. I'll send someone to pick you up." Mrs. Carmen lowered her voice as if afraid of being heard. "Delilah is already awake. She knows today is important, But she's weak. I'm worried if she'll make it. Meredith took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Tell her we're on our way. Nothing will stop us from getting to court. She hung up the phone and looked around, feeling the tension weigh on her shoulders. Time was running out. In prison, Genevieve knelt beside the bunk, her hands clasped in silent prayer. Her sleep-deprived eyes were moist. Lord, I entrust my daughter into your hands. Protect her from any harm. Give her strength to endure this day. Her mother's heart pounded in despair. She wanted to be by Delilah's side, hold her hand, tell her everything would be all right, but all she could do was trust. A loud knock on the cell's bars made her look up. Genevieve, called the wardress. Your lawyer asked me to inform you that your daughter will testify today. The words made her chest swell with hope and fear at the same time. She's okay? The woman hesitated before answering. All I can say is that she's on her way. Genevieve closed her eyes, swallowing the lump in her throat. Be strong, my girl. At the courthouse, Silas rubbed his hands, impatient. He paced back and forth in the hallway reserved for witnesses, his suit impeccable, but his gaze restless. The defense attorney approached, adjusting his glasses. What's up with you? You look nervous. Silas gritted his teeth. I just found out the accused's daughter will testify. The attorney frowned. So what? She's just a child. Silas snorted. A child who was there, seeing everything. The man adjusted his tie, casting a calculating look. Nothing we can't work around. But Silas didn't seem convinced. Fear was now palpable, and for the first time, he knew he could lose. Meredith took a deep breath before entering the courtroom, feeling the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. Every detail of this hearing had been meticulously planned. The strategy was clear. Build the case step by step, starting with the technical evidence, presenting the right testimonies at the exact moment, and finally culminating in the key piece, Delilah's notebook. She knew the emotional impact of that visual diary could tear down any argument from the prosecution. She walked over to the defense table, arranging the documents with surgical precision. When she looked up, she saw Silas on the other side of the room, his expression rigid, his jaw clenched. He knew this hearing would be decisive. The judge entered, and the murmur that filled the courtroom dissipated. The firm voice announced the start of the session, and Meredith stood up, keeping a professional and confident tone. Your Honor, the defense will begin presenting the evidence that proves the innocence of defendant Genevieve Alves and exposes the criminal scheme of which she was a victim. To do this, we will call witnesses and present documents that elucidate how the diversion of medications occurred. She paused, analyzing the judge's reaction. He listened attentively, but something in his posture indicated he was considering the information differently than in previous sessions. Meredith realized that the revelation of his connection to the company weighed on his conscience. If he hesitated, he would fear his reputation being compromised. The first to testify was Thaddeus Calloway. The former employee remained steadfast in reporting how the medications were diverted, explaining in detail the alterations in the records and the manipulation of security cameras. He confirmed that Silas oversaw the scheme and that Genevieve had been chosen as a scapegoat because she was an exemplary employee with no history that would raise suspicions. As Thaddeus spoke, Meredith observed the jurors' reactions. Some took notes, others exchanged discreet glances. She knew she was gaining ground. The prosecution tried to counterattack, insinuating that Thaddeus could be seeking revenge for being fired. Meredith countered immediately, sliding a report across the judge's desk. Here we have records of other employees who left the company under similar circumstances, all reporting internal irregularities. None of them were able to speak out before, as they were afraid of retaliation. The judge analyzed the documents, nodding slowly. For the first time since the beginning of the case, the scales were starting to tip in favor of the defense. The crucial moment was arriving. Meredith took Delilah's notebook, feeling the importance of the object in her hands. She walked to the center of the room and, turning to the jury, raised the notebook. This is the most innocent and, at the same time, the most devastating evidence in this case. Delilah Alves, daughter of the accused, was present during many of the events that culminated in her mother's unjust imprisonment. Without understanding the gravity of what she saw, she recorded everything here. The room fell into absolute silence. Meredith opened the notebook, flipping through the pages. In these drawings, we have visual records of the nighttime movement of trucks. Here, we can see boxes being removed from the company without any official record. And here, she turned to a page where the figure of a man held an envelope. We see the exchange of money between a supervisor and a third party. She pointed to Silas, whose breathing noticeably quickened. The judge leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the notebook. The defense claims that these drawings correspond exactly to the actions recorded in the documents presented? Meredith nodded. We not only claim it, but we prove it. We have images retrieved from the security camera that perfectly align with these visual records made by a child. Delilah, unaware, documented the truth in a way that no one can refute. The prosecution tried to object, claiming that the drawings were subjective, but Meredith had already anticipated this. She turned to the last page and showed a recent drawing made just the night before. And this is Delilah's last drawing. Made while she was hospitalized, what it reveals will be explained by her herself. The murmur resumed in the room. Silas adjusted his tie, his gaze fixed on the notebook. Genevieve, from the defendant's bench, brought her hands to her mouth, holding back tears. And the judge, for the first time, showed something akin to uncertainty. They had reached the turning point. Now all that remained was to see what would happen next. Delilah flipped through the pages of her notebook with trembling fingers, her watchful eyes examining every stroke, as if searching for something she might have missed. The hospital was quiet at that hour of the night, except for the continuous beep of the monitors around her. Mrs. Carmen sat by her side, holding her small hand affectionately. "My dear, you need to rest. Tomorrow will be an important day." But Delilah shook her head, determined. "I need to remember everything. I can't forget anything." Each drawing was a piece of the truth, a fragment of what her eyes had captured when no one else was paying attention. She knew that in court she would have to speak clearly, show everything she had kept secret. It was her only chance to save her mother. Across town, the judge was sitting at his desk, the dim lights illuminating the piles of documents scattered around his office. The silence of the environment only made the weight of the information before him heavier. He ran his hands over his face, exhausted. Something about that trial didn't make sense. He flipped through the records of drug entries again, comparing them with the inventory reports. The math didn't add up. The numbers had been manipulated, the diversions camouflaged with falsified reports. He picked up another document and felt his stomach churn as he realized that the signature used to confirm the stock shortage came from an employee who wasn't even with the company at the time. What had started as a simple case of theft had turned into something much darker. And tomorrow, if the defense brought concrete evidence, he would have to decide between ignoring the facts or confronting something that could bring down powerful names. Meanwhile, in an office away from downtown, Silas swirled the glass of whiskey between his fingers, the amber liquid moving slowly under the dim light of the lamp. The room was spacious, but the air seemed oppressive, laden with tension and angry murmurs. The men around him watched him with closed expressions, impatient. The silence was only broken by the clinking of ice against glass, a low sound, but one that seemed to amplify the weight of the meeting. Until recently, Silas had complete control of the situation. He moved the pieces as he wanted, kept his tracks covered, and ensured that any threat was quickly eliminated. But now, everything was slipping through his fingers. He let out a tense sigh, bringing the glass to his lips, but the alcohol did not warm the chill he felt inside. His gaze drifted to the papers on the table. Documents, reports, information that once served to manipulate the system. Now they were risks. His voice finally broke the silence, but not even he expected it to sound so uncertain. "She's just a child." A heavy silence filled the room. The looks around hardened. None of them were there to question morality. They wanted solutions. Then a voice emerged from the shadows, low and laden with meaning. "Then make sure she never makes it to court." The ice melted in his glass, but what really froze was his blood. Tomorrow everything would be sealed, and Silas only needed to decide how far he was willing to go. The courtroom was thick with anticipation of what was to come. Meredith rose firmly, her eyes analyzing every face present before addressing the judge. "Your Honor, the defense calls Thaddeus Calloway to testify." The former employee entered the courtroom under watchful eyes, his face bearing a mix of determination and apprehension. He knew that by speaking, He would be putting himself against powerful people. But he also knew that remaining silent would mean allowing an injustice to be perpetuated. He sat in the witness chair, straightened his shoulders and looked directly at the judge. "I will reaffirm here before everyone. I will speak again. I worked at the hospital for years and saw things that made me uneasy, but never like this. What happened to Genevieve was not a mistake, it was a plan." Murmurs echoed through the courtroom. Silas kept an impassive expression, but his fingers gripped the arm of the chair. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Go on, Mr. Calloway." Thaddeus took a deep breath. There was a scheme inside the company. High-cost drugs were regularly diverted and resold illegally. Everything was recorded in a way that made it seem like they never existed. The only way for someone to notice was by comparing the incoming and outgoing batches. He paused for a moment before continuing. "It so happens that Genevieve was used as a distraction. When the diversions started to draw attention, someone had to be blamed, and she was the one chosen." Meredith walked slowly through the courtroom, her voice cutting. "Can you affirm that the defendant never participated in this scheme?" Thaddeus nodded without hesitation. "She just wanted to do her job and take care of her daughter, but they were ready to destroy her life to cover up something much bigger." The prosecution tried to discredit him, insinuating that his testimony was motivated by revenge for his dismissal. But Meredith was prepared. She took a remote control and pointed it at a screen installed on the side wall. "The defense would like to present new evidence." The screen flickered and then the images appeared. It was a recovered security footage, one of the few that Silas failed to erase. It clearly showed boxes being removed by employees outside working hours, men loading lots onto a truck. What caught attention was the figure of Silas in the background, conversing with a man handing over an envelope. The jurors leaned in, their eyes fixed on the screen. Meredith paused the image, zooming in on a detail. The company's supervisor, who should have ensured that the stocks were correct, appears here receiving a payment. But the most shocking part is that this recording coincides exactly with the date when Genevieve was accused of theft. On the same day she was allegedly diverting medication, a much more elaborate operation was taking place. The judge frowned, his fingers drumming on the bench. The prosecution shifted, but nothing was said. Silas adjusted his posture, but the sweat on his forehead was beginning to glisten under the courtroom lights. It was at that moment that Delilah, silent until then, moved in her wheelchair and held the notebook in her lap. She raised her eyes to the judge, her voice small but firm. "I saw it too." The silence was absolute. Genevieve swallowed hard, her heart racing. Meredith turned to Delilah, kneeling beside her. "Do you want to show what you drew, Delilah?" The girl nodded and opened the notebook, carefully turning the pages until she stopped at a specific drawing. "This is the first one." She held up the sheet so everyone could see. The childlike drawing showed figures carrying boxes into a large vehicle. The simplicity of the strokes hid the precision of what had been represented. "I was drawing at my little table in the company's kitchen. I like to draw while I wait for Mom, but that night I saw men carrying boxes, and they seemed in a hurry." Delilah turned to the next page. The courtroom watched in silence, everyone captivated by the narrative of a child who had unintentionally documented a crime. In the new drawing, there was a silhouette receiving an envelope. "This man I saw twice. He always took envelopes from another man in a suit." Meredith turned to Silas. "This man in a suit looks a lot like the one in the footage, don't you think?" The supervisor tensed, but remained silent. Delilah continued flipping through her notebook, each page containing a crucial detail, a piece of the puzzle that no one had noticed before. Her voice was weak, but her conviction was strong. "They thought no one was watching, but I saw. I just drew what I saw." The last page of the notebook made Silas turn pale. The drawing showed something no one expected, a simple but undeniable sketch of the supervisor himself inside the office, holding a sheet that appeared to be a document. "I saw this man in the room where Mom works. He was looking at papers and seemed very nervous. It was right before Mom got arrested." Meredith turned to the jurors. "Here is the greatest proof of all. A child who never knew about the scheme, who was never influenced, simply drew the truth. Because she saw. And children don't lie the way adults do." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Silas finally lost his composure, leaning forward. "This is an outrage. We can't take a child's scribbles as evidence seriously." The judge raised his hand, calling for silence. His gaze was serious, heavy, reflecting the impact of what he had just witnessed. "Does the prosecution wish to argue against it?" The prosecutor hesitated, his eyes scanning the expressions in the courtroom. It was obvious that the defense had just landed a devastating blow. The murmur among those present grew louder, an electric tension hanging in the air. Meredith, in turn, crossed her arms, leaning slightly forward before fixing her gaze on Silas. "If they're just scribbles, why are you so nervous?" Her voice sounded firm, cutting. The supervisor swallowed hard. His hands clenched into fists on the table, but he didn't respond. For the first time, his silence was worth more than any word. The judge remained silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on Delilah, absorbing every word the girl had said. The innocence in her voice, the precision of the details she described without even fully understanding the impact of her words, made it impossible to ignore the truth. He took a deep breath, his fingers drumming lightly on the bench before turning to Silas, his expression becoming impenetrable. "Mr. Silas, is there anything you wish to say in your defense in light of this evidence?" The voice was firm, but there was an emotional weight behind it, as if the judge himself already knew that there was no longer any way to deny the facts. Silas adjusted his tie, but his hands were shaking. He tried to maintain his posture, a slight forced smile on his lips, but sweat was trickling down his forehead. "Your Honor, with all due respect, we're talking about children's drawings and testimony based on a child's imagination. This cannot be treated as concrete evidence." His voice faltered as he noticed that the jurors were far from convinced. Meredith stepped forward, holding Delilah's notebook and calmly flipping through the pages. "Mr. Silas, Mrs. Alves was accused of theft on the very night your company was carrying out illegal operations. Here we have records of medication disappearing without any official justification, and in this drawing, a child captured details that no one else noticed. You can deny the records. You can even try to erase documents. But what will you do about this? How do you explain that Delilah, without any external influence, drew exactly what happened that night?" Silas's eyes widened slightly, and he moistened his lips. The room was so quiet that you could hear the hushed breathing of those present. The judge spoke again, his voice firmer now. "Mr. Silas, I'm giving you a chance to clarify these events. Otherwise, I will take the appropriate steps to open a new investigation." The supervisor ran his hand over his face, and his facade began to crumble. Sweat trickled down his forehead, and his hands trembled slightly. The weight of the truth was crushing him. Genevieve, from the defendant's bench, watched the scene with her heart racing. For so long, she had dreamed of this moment, but feared she would never see it happen. Now there, before her eyes, the man who had destroyed her life was cornered by the truth. Silas cleared his throat dry. His voice came out hoarse, almost a whisper. I wasn't the only one. There were more people involved. I was just following orders." The confession fell like thunder in the courtroom. The impact was immediate. Murmurs erupted. The prosecutor shifted in his chair, and Meredith kept her eyes fixed on the supervisor, knowing they had just pulled the thread that would unravel the entire criminal network. The truth was finally coming to light. The courtroom was in absolute silence when the judge took a deep breath and looked at Genevieve. His eyes reflected the gravity of the moment, but also the clarity of someone who finally saw the truth. In a solemn tone, he addressed the defendant, whose life had been destroyed by a false accusation. After a thorough review of the evidence presented, as well as the new testimonies and Mr. Silas's confession, this court declares Genevieve Alves innocent of all charges. The sound of the gavel echoed through the room, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. Genevieve blinked several times, as if she needed time to process those words. Innocent. The weight she had carried on her shoulders for months had finally been removed, and the emotion was overwhelming. Her hands trembled as one of the guards approached, unlocking the handcuffs that had held her for so long. As soon as the cold metal slid from her wrists, her eyes immediately turned to Delilah. The girl, even weak, found the strength to stand up from the wheelchair. Her small body still trembled, but the will to reach her mother was greater than any pain. Genevieve's gaze filled with tears as she saw her daughter walking hesitantly toward her. "Mommy!" Delilah ran as best she could, and Genevieve did not hesitate. In seconds, the two were embracing, sobbing, feeling each other's warmth as if they could recover all the lost time in a single moment. My love, it's over. Mommy is here, Genevieve whispered through tears, holding Delilah against her chest as if she would never let her go. The spectators watched the scene with teary eyes, some jurors discreetly wiping away tears. Mrs. Carmen, standing beside Meredith, pressed her hands against her chest, murmuring emotional thanks. But on the other side of the courtroom, the outcome was quite different. Silas and his accomplices were surrounded by law enforcement agents. The man who had maintained an arrogant demeanor for so long now found himself cornered, unable to escape. His face was pale, his false confidence crumbling in the face of the verdict. As the officers began to handcuff him, he still tried to argue, but his voice failed him. "You can't do this. I didn't act alone." The judge gave him a stern look. "All information will be investigated, and those responsible will pay for their crimes. But in this court, the truth has been exposed." The audience watched in silence as the criminals were taken away one by one. Justice was finally being served. Genevieve closed her eyes for a moment, holding Delilah in her arms. All she wanted now was to go home. The impact of the court's decision reverberated beyond the courtroom. The press was quick to report the shocking reversal of the case, exposing flaws in the system and corruption within the hospital. Images of Genevieve being released and embracing Delilah aired on every channel, deeply touching the public. The public outcry pressured the small hospital involved in the scandal to make a statement, and in an attempt to repair some of the damage caused, an announcement was made. Delilah would have access to the best available medical treatment, at no cost, with all expenses fully covered. Genevieve heard the news with a mixture of relief and disbelief. After so much suffering, her daughter would finally receive the care she had always needed without having to worry about money. Holding Delilah's hands, she smiled, her eyes still moist from the tears she had shed. "Now you're going to be okay, my love. Mommy promises." Delilah, still weak, rested her head on her mother's shoulder and smiled faintly. "Now we can go home?" Genevieve kissed her forehead, feeling her heart warm at that word. "Yes, my angel, home." Meanwhile, Meredith's brilliant performance during the trial did not go unnoticed. Her name echoed through the courthouse halls, and within a few days the news that would forever change her professional life arrived. The prosecution recognized her talent, and her unwavering dedication to the case resulted in a well-deserved promotion. When she received the call, Meredith fell silent for a moment, absorbing the weight of those words. "You have proven to be an exceptional lawyer, Meredith. The court needs more professionals like you." She smiled, proud not only of the recognition, but also of having served justice. Mrs. Carmen, in turn, was honored at a community event, where she received a plaque of recognition for her loyalty and dedication. The elderly woman, who never sought anything more than to help Genevieve and Delilah, was moved to be called on stage, receiving applause from the entire neighborhood. "I only did what any kind-hearted person would do. We take care of each other, because that's what makes us human." Her words touched everyone, and Genevieve hugged her tightly after the ceremony. "I would never have made it without you." Justice had finally been served, and all those who fought for it were being rewarded. But above all, Genevieve and Delilah were together again, and that was the greatest victory of all. The morning sun gently entered through the window, illuminating the small living room where Delilah sat with a colored pencil in her hand, focused on her new drawing. Months had passed since that trial that had forever changed their lives, and now the girl was healthy, full of energy and smiles. Around her, the wall told its own story. The drawings that had saved her mother were framed, displayed with care, as a reminder that the truth and courage of a child had been able to serve justice. Genevieve entered the room and stopped for a moment, observing her daughter drawing. Her heart warmed as she noticed the serene expression on Delilah's face, so different from the girl who, months before, had struggled against illness and her mother's absence. Now, everything was where it should be. "What are you drawing, my love?" Genevieve asked, approaching and running her hand through her daughter's soft hair. Delilah smiled without taking her eyes off the paper. "Our family. Now that everything is all right, I want to preserve this moment too." Genevieve blinked a few times, holding back her emotion. She sat down beside Delilah and watched the delicate strokes take shape on the paper. There they were, holding hands, with Miss Carmen beside them and Meredith holding a document, a symbol of their victory. In the background, the sun shone brightly and a rainbow stretched across the sky. "It's perfect, my angel," Genevieve whispered, as she enveloped her daughter in a loving embrace. On the other side of the room, her phone vibrated. It was a reminder about an important meeting at work. Since she had been reinstated, she not only received a formal apology from the hospital, but was also promoted. Her talent and dedication had always been unquestionable, and now, without the shadow of injustice, she could pursue her career with pride. "Mommy, now we can draw happy moments," said Delilah, resting her head on her mother's shoulder. Genevieve smiled, kissing the top of her head. "And we'll have many of them ahead." The camera slowly pulls away from the scene, showing the house full of life. The drawings on the walls telling a story of overcoming, and Delilah, with a serene smile, creating a new chapter with her colors. The screen gently fades to black, ending the journey of mother and daughter who together prevailed against all odds. The morning sun gently streamed through the apartment window, warming the environment with a golden light. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the sweet perfume of the flowers adorning the living room table. Genevieve was in the kitchen, watching the clock with an anxious smile on her lips. It was a special day, a day she had waited for with all her heart. A year had passed since that trial that had changed their lives forever, and now she could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Delilah was cured. The intensive treatment, the months of back and forth to the hospital, the painful chemotherapy sessions, it was all part of a difficult past, but one that was left behind. The hospital, which was once a place of fear and uncertainty, had become a symbol of hope. The medical team had done the impossible, and Delilah had responded well to the treatment. Week after week, the tests showed improvements, until finally the confirmation came. There were no more sick cells in her body. Genevieve cried that day, cried like she hadn't cried in a long time. Now, her daughter had a new chance. "Good morning, Mom." The childish voice sounded cheerful, and Genevieve turned just in time to see Delilah coming into the kitchen, her short hair shining, her eyes alive with happiness. She looked like a normal child again. No deep dark circles, no weakness, no constant paleness that had accompanied her for so long. Genevieve wiped her hands on her apron and crouched down, opening her arms. "Good morning, my love. Today is a special day." Delilah laughed, throwing herself into her mother's arms. "I know, the doctor said I'm okay. I can do anything I want now." Genevieve hugged her tightly, feeling her heart overflowing. For so long she had dreamed of that moment, of the day when she could tell her daughter that the worst was over. "Yes, my angel. Now you can do anything you want." The doorbell rang, and when Genevieve opened the door, she found Mrs. Carmen and Meredith smiling, holding a large basket of sweets and colorful balloons. "We came to celebrate this victory with you," said the elderly woman, coming in and already pulling Delilah into a tight hug. "My girl, look at you. Strong as a lioness." Meredith approached Genevieve, holding her hand. "There's nothing better than seeing you two like this. Delilah won. You won." Genevieve squeezed the lawyer's hand with gratitude. "None of this would have been possible without you, Meredith. You saved our lives." Meredith smiled but shook her head. "It was you, Genevieve. You never gave up." The afternoon was filled with laughter, stories, and good food. Delilah ran around the apartment, playing with the balloons, dancing to the music Genevieve had put on the radio. For the first time in years, Genevieve felt the lightness of complete happiness. There was no more fear, no more pain, only the promise of a new future, full of possibilities. Later, as she watched Delilah drawing at the little table in the living room, Genevieve sat down beside her daughter, caressing her short hair. "What are you drawing, my love?" Delilah smiled, showing her the paper. "Our house and everyone who helped us." In the drawing there were Genevieve, Delilah, Mrs. Carmen, Meredith, the doctors and nurses from the hospital. In the background, a large sun shone in the sky. Genevieve felt her eyes well up. "It's perfect, my love, just like our life now." Night fell, and as Delilah slept peacefully in her bed, Genevieve stood at the doorway of the room, watching her. A year ago, she wondered if she would have more nights like this, if she would still have the chance to see her daughter grow up. Now the answer was there, in every soft breath, in every beat of that strong heart. She closed her eyes for a moment, giving thanks. The battle had been hard, but they had won. And this was just the beginning of a life full of new stories to tell. The name Meredith Vaughn was no longer just another among many lawyers. In just 1 year, her career took a turn she never imagined. The case of Genevieve Winslow was not only a victory in the courts, it was a watershed moment, the spark that ignited something much greater within her. That experience transformed her. The moment she saw an innocent mother freed and embrace her daughter, after so much suffering, was the exact instant Meredith knew she couldn't stop there. Since then, she has tirelessly dedicated herself to fighting for people who, like Genevieve, were crushed by an unjust system, victims of false accusations and structures corrupted by power and greed. She became an expert in civil rights and defense of victims of legal setups, and over time, her name became feared by corporations and powerful figures who once acted with impunity. That morning, Meredith walked with firm steps through the imposing building where her new office was located. She was no longer just any lawyer. Now she had her own firm, a space dedicated to cases of injustice, especially those involving workers unjustly accused by large companies. Her work echoed in newspaper headlines and television programs. People knew that if someone was a victim of a fraudulent accusation, Meredith Vaughn was the name they should seek. Upon entering the room, she found her secretary organizing a pile of documents on the desk. "Doctor, the press wants an interview about this client's case here. They want to know how you managed to overturn such a heavy conviction in less than a month." Meredith took off her blazer and hung it on the chair, picking up one of the papers. The client the secretary had mentioned was a woman who had been falsely accused of embezzlement at a charity institution, another case in which the system preferred to punish the victim instead of investigating the true culprits. Meredith let out a sigh and smiled slightly. "Let's give that interview. People need to know that there is justice for those who fight." The lawyer sat at the table and reviewed the upcoming cases, all marked as urgent. Workers accused of crimes they did not commit, families who lost everything due to unfair decisions, mothers separated from their children. Different stories, but all united by the same thread of suffering. Meredith felt that her mission was not just to win cases, it was to restore dignity to people. Shortly after, her phone rang. Upon answering, she recognized the voice of the journalist who covered high-impact cases. "Dr. Meredith, Mrs. Montero's case had national repercussions. The public wants to know, why did you choose to dedicate your career to these people?" Meredith smiled and looked out the window of the building, observing the city that had so often failed the innocent. "Because I believe that no one should lose their life due to a miscarriage of justice. I saw a mother being torn from her daughter's arms for something she didn't do. I saw a child fight to save her mother when no one else believed her. And I promised myself that I would never let that happen again." On the other end of the line, the journalist remained silent for a moment before asking, "You have become a symbol of justice, but have you ever been threatened?" Meredith smiled wryly, remembering all the times they had tried to silence her. Anonymous calls, intimidation attempts, even offers to drop some cases. Yes, many. But fear does not make me back down. It only reminds me that I'm on the right path. After ending the interview, Meredith went back to reviewing a new case that had arrived that morning. This time it was about a nurse accused of stealing medication. She frowned. The same story, the same crime they had pinned on Genevieve. Her chest tightened. There were so many Genevieves out there, so many people who had been wrongfully imprisoned, with no one to defend them. She picked up the phone and dialed a number she knew well. "Mrs. Carmen, how are you?" The elderly woman responded on the other end of the line with an animated tone. "My daughter, what a joy to hear your voice. I'm great. And you?" Meredith smiled. Whenever she spoke to Mrs. Carmen, she felt a strange peace, as if she were back to the day it all began. Working hard but happy. "How's Delilah?" Mrs. Carmen laughed. "Oh, that girl. Stronger than ever, and drawing all the time. The other day she drew you holding a judge's gavel. She said you're a superhero." Meredith laughed, moved. "A hero, huh? Tell her I'm just a lawyer trying to do what's right." After hanging up, Meredith stood still for a moment, observing the drawings that now decorated her office. She had framed some of the images made by Delilah in court, as a reminder of the reason she fought every day. They were simple drawings made by a child, but they carried the truth in a way no legal report could express. She took a deep breath and stood up, grabbing her briefcase and preparing for the next hearing. The world needed more justice, and she had no intention of stopping. As she crossed the courthouse hallways, she felt the admiring glances of other lawyers, prosecutors, and even judges who now knew exactly who she was. Meredith Vaughn was no longer just a lawyer. She was the voice of those who had never been heard, and on that day, like every other, she would fight again. The cold, impersonal cell was now Silas's only world. The small space, with its grey, lifeless walls, reflected the exact feeling of suffocation that grew within him with each passing day. Time, once his ally in the obscure business he commanded, was now his greatest enemy. Every minute seemed to stretch into eternity. The silence of the prison nights was different from any other he had ever experienced. It was not a silence of rest, but of a constant weight, where his conscience echoed truths he had spent his life trying to ignore. His conviction had been clear: years in prison for diversion of medications, fraud, and manipulation of evidence. But beyond that, the judge had imposed something he had never imagined facing: community service in a public hospital specializing in the treatment of childhood cancer. The system understood that criminals like him needed not only to serve a sentence but to learn. Being confronted with the lives he had helped destroy was a far more severe punishment than any concrete cell could offer. On the first morning he was taken to the hospital to begin his mandatory work, Silas kept his expression closed. The beige prisoner's uniform contrasted with the impeccable cleanliness of the environment, and he noticed the looks he received. Some were of curiosity, others of disdain. He was a criminal there, and everyone knew it. His supervisor, a middle-aged man with a tired but kind look, handed him a white smock. "You'll be in the children's ward. We need someone to help with organization, deliver materials, and accompany patients to their exams. Don't think this is optional. You'll do this every day." For a moment, Silas felt the urge to respond with arrogance as he had in his days of power. But now there was no one to flatter him, to fear him. He simply nodded, took the smock, and followed the man down the brightly lit hallways. The smell of disinfectant mixed with a faint scent of flowers from the few decorations scattered around the hospital created a strangely welcoming atmosphere, but not for him. He wanted to be far away from this place, far from the memories that haunted him. But justice had been clear. He would remain there until he learned. On the first day, his job was simple: to organize materials, load boxes of supplies, and clean some common areas. He avoided looking at the children who passed through the hallways, pushed in wheelchairs or carrying IV stands. He didn't want to see their faces, didn't want to feel what that caused him, but it was impossible to ignore them. They were everywhere, some without hair due to chemotherapy, others with tired eyes, but full of a hope he couldn't understand. On the third day, he was instructed to take one of the little patients to the examination room. He hesitated when he saw the pale-skinned girl with a serene expression looking at him. "Will you take me?" she asked with a faint smile. He nodded and, for the first time in a long time, felt his voice fail as he answered, "Yes." As the days passed, he began to know those children. Against his own will, he learned their names, heard their stories. Her 7-year-old boy told him about his collection of toy cars. A 14-year-old girl said she dreamed of becoming a doctor, even though she knew her battle against the disease was far from over. And then, Silas began to realize something terrifying. The medications he had diverted were exactly what they needed to keep fighting. Guilt hit him like a blow. For years, he had justified his actions with empty rationalizations. The company makes enough profit. It doesn't make that much difference. Someone will always get what they need. But now, looking at those children who smiled even in the face of pain, he realized that yes, it did make a difference. Perhaps because of him, some of those beds were empty. Perhaps because of his greed, some childish voices would never be heard in that hospital again. One night, as he organized the medication records in the stockroom, he felt the presence of the supervisor approaching. "You've been doing a good job," the man said, observing him for a moment before continuing. "But I see there's something heavy on you." Silas let out a sigh, his eyes fixed on the shelf in front of him. If I had made the right choices, some of these children wouldn't be here. His voice was low, laden with the weight of guilt that grew every day. The supervisor crossed his arms, studying him. Regret is only valuable if it comes accompanied by change. You can't go back in time, but you can decide who you'll be from here on out. In the following days, something changed in Silas. For the first time, he began volunteering for tasks he had previously avoided. He read stories to the children in the recreation room, helped organize the medicines he had once stolen, and even learned to handle the little details that made a difference in a patient's day. He saw up close the mothers who spent sleepless nights by their children's sides, the doctors who fought to keep each one alive, the nurses who became family to those little warriors. He saw, and he could no longer look away. In the 6th month, something happened that shook him deeply. One of the girls he talked to daily didn't show up for the drawing session in the recreation room. When he asked about her, he received a somber look from the nurse. She didn't make it. The words fell upon him like an unbearable weight. Didn't make it. That child had laughed with him just days before. She had talked about her favorite drawing, said she wanted a dog when she left the hospital, but she never left. That night, for the first time since his conviction, Silas cried. He cried not for the time he would spend in prison, nor for the power he had lost, but for everything he had done, for everything he had taken away. When he completed 1 year of mandatory service at the hospital, Silas was called to the director's office. The man looked at him for a long moment before saying, "If you want to keep coming, you can come, but now as a volunteer." Silas didn't know what to answer right away. He still had more years to serve in prison, but that night as he looked at the reflection in the cell's glass, he realized something. For the first time, he didn't just see a criminal. He saw a man trying to be better, and so he made a decision. When the next day dawned, Silas took the prison's beige uniform, put the white smock over it, and without anyone needing to order him, returned to the hospital. Did you like the story of Genevieve and Delilah? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and check out the next one. Waiting for you here on the screen. I'll be waiting for you there.